The exhibition really kind of starts from an essay I wrote in 2008. That essay was concerned with what I termed as a subtitle, the archaeological imaginary in art. And it was an essay that kind of departed from an observation that many contemporary artists today are interested not just in archives, not just in history, but really in acts of excavating and digging. My impression is, in fact, that for most of the first decade of the 21st century, one of the dominant preoccupations of contemporary art in a critical sense has been this concern with history. So in a sense, this exhibition offers a survey of that particular movement or that particular trend or that particular paradigm in contemporary art, something that I've called the historiographic turn. The shovel that's referred in the title is an allusion, obviously, to the archaeological trade or the archaeological paradigm, and it's important also to kind of stress that this is an exhibition that that is concerned with history, but that really kind of narrows down that concern through the lens of the archaeological metaphor. But then, on the other hand, also archaeology as subject matter, as a topic, as the actual content of the work.
I'm very careful not to pretend to be an archaeologist. I know what I do is not what they do. I know that my archaeological projects are not archaeology in the purest sense. At the same time, I think that there are aspects that do overlap with how one presents archaeology. So not so much what archaeological science itself, but rather that place where it gets mediated for the public. So what I try to do is to short circuit or go against the grain of how archaeology is presented to the public, and to play with their expectations of what archaeology is, and to disrupt the kind of official story that we get told what archaeology is. And I think that this, much to my surprise, has resonated a lot in the archaeology community. That wasn't really a community that I expected I would have such a strong dialogue with. And so it rippled these projects in ways that I didn't anticipate. And there are layers of meaning that I didn't anticipate, that which is what I always kind of hope for as an artist, is that you make something even richer than you imagine.
Another element that is really quite important in this exhibition is this notion of research, basically, research of historical materials. And this notion that, the artist in a way explores, searches, unnerves, that the artist is kind of engaged in the process of the discovery of something that's been forgotten or something that's been trampled over, marginalized, cast by the wayside.
My passion is to go to these archives. I love to see the actual document. It looks like a watercolor rendering, these beautiful scripts and these cotton rag. I'm like infatuated with the objects. So if I could photograph a document, I put the photograph of the document there so that the audience can see the object, not just the information. And so I think that sort of separates what I do from what a historian does, which is to sit down, look at the documents, to read them, to find in that primary source an idea that might link to another idea. And in my case, I'm trying to show exactly what's happened. I try to unravel the history, unpack it, and then present it.
Photography is super essential when you think of archaeology, because it's something has been under the earth for a long time and then unearthed. And that moment when it comes to the earth's surface, it has been shot, depicted by a picture, photographic image, before again being transported into a museum. That moment when it's like, I'm always depicting it as this watch with the sand, that kind of, you have this sand that's running, and there is this archaeological moment. And then when the sand is gone, then you see this sculpture. You take a picture and then the sand comes back in, but the sand is the museum collection where it's stored in boxes for ages, and not anyone can see it for a long time, unless it's exhibited, of course.
I noticed just this kind of growing enthusiasm among a generation of artists, people born in the 60s, early 70s, that many of these people kind of turned to history for artistic inspiration. Of course, this is not new. I mean, artists of all ages and all eras have have been in a dialogue with history and with art history, but all of a sudden so many artists were working with 16mm film or 8mm film, like obsolete media. The Kodak slide carousel was going out of production, and all of a sudden there's this rush among the artist population to kind of, salvage it from oblivion. All kinds of printing procedures and photographic techniques that were basically really on their way out.
Why do I use 16mm film? Why I'm attracted to this media? I think to some extent art has become almost a reservation for kind of things that have become obsolete elsewhere. And there's also something else to be said for 16mm, and that is that when you are in a space with a film projector, it's always that projector at that moment in that space, and it is that copy. What happens is that the copy slowly wears down. So all the dust that is in the museum, it settles on the film, and it actually changes the film a bit. It becomes specific. It's always at that moment and with that copy, and that copy won't look exactly like that anywhere else. So I like that element of something specific. And the last thing that I use a lot is that the sound of the projector is almost like a soundtrack. So there's no need for sound, so to speak. There's such a momentum in the projector itself. It's almost like a train or narrative. It just goes on and on and on. A sense of urgency.
History is the discipline that studies the written record of human civilization, whereas archaeology is concerned primarily with material traces, with shards. And that's an important factor to take into account, because the exhibition includes a lot of photographic work and film-based work. Those are artworks that have a strong kind of documentary dimension, but there's also a lot of matter in the exhibition, installations and sculptural work. And in the selection of those works, I also wanted to remind the viewer that archaeology is a materialist undertaking. It kind of approaches history as a story that's made up of actual stuff. And there, of course, archaeology and art easily converge.
I can say that I've been always very interested in the materials themselves, and I think that's also very important about this exhibition, that it's about archaeology, but it's not just theoretical approach to the subject, but it also has to do with materials, with the things you find which are rubbish, which are nothing, which have no meaning. And finally, it's us who try to give meaning to this rubble, and we try to arrange it in a way, or we try to do something with it. But at the end, it's meaningless without our effort to make sense of it. Also, for me, it's interesting to see how artists use these things in order to transform matter in many different ways. So I like that a lot about the archaeological approach in the context of conceptual art. There are two things that somehow collide but complement each other.
I like to come to a place and explore it, find things of interest to me, and then research them both through books and history and the internet, and also through people I meet and talk to. Start to blend ideas, but mainly what I end up interested in is things that are kind of hidden histories, or maybe hidden objects, or things that become ambiguous. I often work in abandoned buildings. I try and use only the materials I find in those abandoned buildings to make sculptures and photo projects. The layers to me are really important. To go into an abandoned building and build a pyramid, for example, out of the floor tiles of the building. I'm building a ruin within a ruin, but one of the ruins is thought of as a monument, whereas the other isn't thought of as something special. It's thought of sadly.
Well, for me, quite simply, art is a critical force in society and in the world at large. And there is, for sure, a critical dimension in the exhibition. And when thinking about this subject matter, you're also struck, of course, by the profusion of the prefix re. Return, reconstruct, reimagine, recycle. So it's always this, this returning really is kind of at the heart of the exhibition's logic. This impulse to look back in an attempt to also kind of look forward. Any form of imagination is always a projective one that kind of projects itself into the future.
That question of the past leading to the future is something I'm very interested in. It's a focus of a lot of my projects in terms of looking at the past, but not looking at it for the purpose of nostalgia, but looking at the way that the past actually may have presented a prototype or a blueprint for what something could be right now. So in a lot of the projects that I'm working on that deal with the identity of being an Arab Jew as the son of an Iraqi Jewish mother, that kind of identity speaks a certain amount of truth to power, calling oneself an Arab Jew, because it denies, the Zionist narrative of suddenly becoming this thing called Israeli. It recuperates a lot of those histories that were hijacked or suppressed, that speak to the centuries and centuries and centuries, the millennia really, of coexistence. Because I think if we're only looking to the past for the sake of a kind of nostalgia is okay. That means that we want to go home, but we all know how impossible return really is.
Am I just an observer in this movement that I chronicle? I'm more than just an observer. I'm a champion really of this art movement, because I think it's an important one. It fulfills an important role in the way we kind of imagine art to function in the world at large. The historiographic turn in art also needs its own historian, and I'm happy to be that person.